Hello and welcome to ECO-UNESCO's workshop on Drastic about plastic. My name is Emer Manning and I am the Environmental Education and Youth Coordinator at ECO-UNESCO. So this is obviously a pre-recorded workshop, and just so you're aware of how it's going to go, I'm going to build up to an activity, and when I get to the point where I'd like you all to do the activity together, I'm going to prompt your teacher to pause the video. Your teacher or youth worker will then pause the video, give you time to do the activity, and whenever you're finished, you can just re-hit play. There'll be a 3, 2, 1 countdown, and then I'll just play as normal and lead you into the next activity. So it should be fairly simple, but we'll do a practice one in a few minutes. But first of all, I want to talk about who are ECO-UNESCO. Some of you may have heard of us before and some of you may not. So ECO-UNESCO are a youth and environmental education organisation. We're actually a non-governmental organisation and a charity combined. We were founded in 1986 and most people know us from our Young Environmentalist Awards. So for those of you who don't know what the Young Environmentalist Awards, or YEA for short, it's kind of like the BT Young Scientist Awards. So groups from all over Ireland complete projects together and then put them forward to try and win prizes for their group or for their school. But every single project that is put forward at the YEA has to have an environmental focus. So what we tend to do with these environmental workshops is try to incite a passion or light a fire inside you to make you want to do an environmental action project. And if by the end of this workshop any of you think, I think I would really like to do an environmental action project on this or another environmental topic, please do feel free to ask your teacher to reach out to us and we can provide you with more training or more information on how to do an environmental action project. All of our workshops and every action project that's brought into the YEA is rooted in the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, or UN SDGs for short. So as you look at some of these goals, some of you will hopefully have seen these before. If you haven't seen these before, I really do recommend that you go and delve into these goals deeper. So as you can see, there are 17 goals here, and these were essentially written by the United Nations back in 2015 to try to complete all of these goals by the year 2030. Now, some of these goals are massive in size. So for example, goal 2 is zero hunger. And you might think there's no way that we can get zero global hunger by the year 2030. But that's why I said to go and delve into them deeper, is because when you actually do look into these goals, there are sub-goals within each one, like little check boxes or markers that we have to hit to make sure that we get to that overall goal of zero hunger. So it makes it much easier to do it that way. So we're going to have our test activity now. So bearing in mind that this workshop is called Drastic about plastic, I just want you to take maybe 1 or 2 minutes to shout out and kind of brainstorm loudly in your class what are some goals that you think I'm going to touch off today in this workshop with you. So just take 1 to 2 minutes and call out to your teacher some of the goals that you think we'll look at. For the first time, teacher, you can pause the video here. Okay, welcome back. I hope that all worked out well for you for our test activity break. But essentially, there is no actual wrong answer here. A lot of the goals are interlinked with one another as well, and we will touch off some goals in a smaller way than others. But the main goals that we'll be focusing on today are probably number 3, good health and well-being, number 6, clean water and sanitation, number 11, sustainable cities and communities, number 12, responsible consumption and production, number 13, climate action, number 14, life below water, number 15, life on land, and we're actually already doing number 17, which is partnerships for the goals. I'm partnering with you to talk about the goals. And you could say that right now I'm giving you quality education, so number 4. So what we're going to do before we jump into the really heavy stuff of this workshop is we're just going to do a bit of a warm-up and kind of get our brains focused and ready for this. So, teacher, what I want you to do, this is going to be the first big activity. What I want you to do is split the class into groups, and we're going to split them into groups of maybe 3 or 4. And what I want you all to do is to play a game that's called Samesies. So what this game entails is that all of you are going to be in your groups, and you will have 5 minutes to come up with 3 things that all of you have in common. However, this is easier if I'm talking to a youth group, because you probably all don't go to the same school. But if I'm talking to a school right now, you have to pick 3 things that are outside of school. You can't say, for example, if you're wearing the same uniform, we all wear grey pants. You can't do that. You can't say, if I'm talking to an all-boys school right now, you can't say, we are all male, right? You can't do that. It has to be outside of school. So, 5 minutes, find 3 things that you all have in common. Teacher, you can pause the video here. Okay, welcome back. I hope you learned some interesting common things that you all have with each other. So we're going to delve into the real content of the workshop now, and let's start nice and easy. Let's look at plastic. Let's really look at it. What is it? So I'm not sure if many people know what plastic actually starts its life as. We can't just dig plastic out of the ground. It's not like a rock or a mineral. Plastic is actually oil, as in fossil fuel oil. Now, when we say fossil fuel, I also think that sometimes people don't understand that it's called fossil fuel because it is fuel that we use to heat houses and to drive cars and planes, etc. But the fossil part is actually true. It is fossils. The oil is basically liquidized fossils of dinosaurs, of animals, of plants, of old sea sediment, of old rocks that's been crushed and pressed over time, and that pressure turns those fossils into one of 3 things usually, which is oil, gas, or coal, so kind of more of a solid material. So in this case, plastic comes from oil. So if anybody sitting in front of the screen here watching me has like a Coca-Cola bottle or a Ballygown bottle on their table, that could have been a T-Rex one day. You don't know. But essentially what happens is that oil is found and it is pulled out of the earth with these kind of leveraging machines that suck the oil up out from really, really deep underground and feed them through pipes that bring them to buildings that are called kind of oil refineries. And in the oil refineries, the oil is cracked. And what this means is that I'm going to bring my mouse onto this screen so you can see it there, the little blue mouse. The crude oil, which is basically the oil that is pulled directly from the ground, goes through this massive, massive furnace to really, really heat it and get it very, very melted and thick and gross. But the furnace heats at different levels the whole way up and down. So it's hotter at the bottom and it's much cooler at the top. And depending on where the oil sits when it's heated is actually what the oil is then siphoned away and is used for. So oil that sits at the hottest level down here at 400 degrees, this would be really, really thick oil, would go for making asphalt for roads and stuff like that. Then we'd have fuel and diesel and kerosene and petrol. So fuel oil would be more like jet plane oil, and gasoline would be more for cars. And then everything that all of the gas that escapes from that oil will then be taken up and be used as actual fossil fuel gas. And we can use all of these different things to make roads, to make fuel for barbecues, to make plastic bottles and straws, to make fuel and parts for cars, especially tires is a huge one, and to light our homes. So the different plastics are graded, given these numbers, based on their strength and durability. So for example, number 1, PET plastic tends to be what plastic bottles are made of. So you can kind of crush it and squish it and flatten it. Whereas number 3, PVC, is what those really hard, rigid pipes in your house are made from, so you can't really crush that. So depending on the different structure of the plastic, it's given this different number. They can also add dyes to the plastic at this stage to make them into different colours, like you can see in the bottom picture. And those tiny little, essentially beads of plastic, are called nurdles, and all plastic items that you might have around your house or in your youth group or in your school start their life as nurdles, and nurdles are sold to companies. So I should also mention that with the numbers 1 to 7, some plastics are safer than others, especially for human use. So for example, number 1 with your plastic bottle, I kind of have them graded here in colours. Green colour is like a good plastic, and then red is dangerous for human consumption, and then the yellow ones are kind of okay, but we don't really know enough about them yet. So number 1, the issue with this, and particularly with plastic water bottles, is that the material that it's made of chips away after first use. So for example, if you have a water bottle and you drink half of it and then leave it for a few hours and then you go back and drink more, the part of the water bottle that was dry for so long has actually already started to chip and has started to fall into the water below. So a couple of hours later, when you go back to drink that water, you could be drinking tiny microscopic pieces of plastic. And some of you may have heard that humans are consuming plastic, and we're finding plastic in human guts and in human feces. And this could be one of the main ways that we're getting it. Another main way that we're getting it is through tea bags. So tea bags themselves, the actual bag part, are made of a ton of plastic fibers, and if you put that in boiling water, those fibers start to break down in your tea. So try to buy non-plastic tea bags as well. So number 2 tends to be like conditioner bottles, milk bottles. We haven't seen any evidence that these chip and break away, which is great. Number 3 is cling film type plastic, and PVC for pipes. So this can release what's called diotoxins, which may contain lead, so they should not be reused. This is kind of once they've already been used and exposed to whatever they're going to be exposed to. To be honest, just try not to use cling film. It is hugely unenvironmentally friendly, and if you're wrapping it around food and it could contain diotoxins, it's just not very healthy. Try looking for silicone food coverings, which are great, or tin foil instead. Number 4 and number 5 are fine. That tends to be what like harder plastic bottles are made out of, like the reusable plastic bottles, and kitchen materials, so spatulas and things like that. Number 6 is styrene or polystyrene or styrofoam. You all might know of it as a different word, but this releases a neurotoxin which can affect human brain cells. It should not be reused. It's fine for single use, but once it's kind of punctured or used or soiled, don't use it again. It's also not recyclable, or not at least easily recyclable in Ireland. Most of it is thrown away. If there's not huge batches of it, it's just thrown in the bin. So try to avoid polystyrene when you can. And then number 7 is actually a mix of 2 or more plastics. So the reason why I have this one as a maybe is that if you mix 4 and 5, that would technically be a safe plastic because it wouldn't leach, but they don't tell you which plastics are in it. They just label it number 7 because it's a mix of 2. So for all you know, the plastic that you're using could be a mix of 3 and 6, in which case it's really dangerous to reuse. So 7's kind of it depends on the plastic used, but the problem is you're never going to know what plastics they used. So moving on, we're going to go and talk about our nurdles. So nurdles and these preform shapes is what they're called, are bought by companies. Usually the preform shapes are bought. So essentially there'll be a giant factory that will take in all of these tiny little nurdle pellets, and they will melt them into the shape of They kind of look like little test tubes, essentially. And those test tubes or preform shapes are what are sold to the bigger corporations. So, for example, Coca-Cola would buy a ton of these test tube preform shapes. When the preforms get to Coca-Cola, Coca-Cola has this grey mold here that will be in the shape of their Coca-Cola bottles. You can see it there. So this is the preformed test tube. So they will put the test tube here and they will pump really, really hot air down through the test tube. And then they will close the mold around the test tube. And as they pump the hot air in, it will get longer and longer and it'll push the plastic down further and further through the test tube. And then once the length has been reached, then they'll start to pump the air into the sides of the test tube instead of straight down. And that's what will blow the plastic out to actually meet the shape of the mold. And then once that's done, they will open the mold, trim off the top and trim off the bottom, and there you go, your lovely Coca-Cola bottle, or whatever bottle, shampoo bottle, or yeah, whatever. And that pretty much goes for everything that you buy that's plastic shape. They'll start as nurdles, they'll go to some sort of preform shape, and then that preform shape will be sold to whatever company wants that type of shape, and then they will mold it to whatever way suits them. So then the product is labeled and sold. And for here, I think it's really important to talk about the labels. So what I want you to do is we're going to get into groups again of maybe 3 or 4. So teacher, you can arrange those groups whatever way you want. So there are 4 recycling symbols on this sheet of paper. So half of these symbols that you can see in front of you are recycling symbols. And all I want you to do is just take maybe 2 minutes and I want you to just think in your groups and in your teams which ones are recycling symbols. Some of them are there to trick you out on purpose, so think really, really carefully. And I'll see you in 2 minutes. Teacher, you can pause the video here. Okay, welcome back. So, the answers, the ones that are recycling symbols, are number 2, number 3, number 4, and number 5. The rest are not recycling symbols. So number 5 is basically aluminium, which can always be recycled. So that tends to be on aluminium. And number 4, number 3, and number 2 are just regular recycling symbols, but they do look different from one another. The most confusing one by far is number 1. So we're going to come back to that one in a second, and I'm really quickly just going to talk about 6, 7, 8. So number 6 is basically just a public campaign awareness to say, please put your rubbish in the bin instead of littering. Number 7 means that it is not suitable for your regular bin. So usually you would see this on things like chemicals or hot ashes, stuff like that. Number 8 stands for Forest Stewardship Council, and it's basically sustainably sourced paper. So whenever you are buying a paper product, do look out for that lovely little tree symbol. But let's go back to number 1 because it is the most confusing and many people think that that is a recycling symbol when it's not. Number 1 is the green dot symbol, and the green dot symbol was introduced to allow the consumer to know if the company's products that they're buying, if that company donates to recycling centres. That's essentially it. But there's been some issues noticed with this, that because so many people think that the green dot symbol is a recycling symbol, what companies will do is actually not make their products out of recycled or recyclable materials. They will just make their products out of any unsustainable but cheap material that they can, and then just make a really small donation to a recycling factory and essentially be able to put the green dot symbol on their products, and everybody thinks that it's the recyclable symbol. And this causes huge issues for recycling plants because they are being sent all of these products that can't be recycled, but they have that little green dot symbol on them, and people are just totally misled. other issue is that the new recycling symbol that's coming into effect now more commonly is number 4, and both of them are green and white circles, which makes it even more complicated. But the green dot symbol is essentially one green arrow and one white arrow swirling around each other. That is not a recycling or recyclable symbol. So just bear that in mind whenever you're buying something. Ideally, you're looking for the triangle, or you're looking for number 4 or number 5 if it comes to aluminium or plastic. Most places at the moment still use numbers 2 and 3. So after all of this talk of plastic, just do be aware that it did start as oil. So everything plastic that you buy started as a fossil fuel, and many, many fossil fuels have been burned along the way to make that into an actual usable plastic for you. Plastic is not particularly environmentally friendly and should be avoided wherever possible. But having said that, we need plastic. So this can be a little bit of a tricky thing to think about for some people, because it's easy to list 5 bad things about plastic. I think all of us know 5 bad things about plastic. But I also want you to list 5 good things about plastic, which can be a bit more complex. So I'm going to give everybody maybe 5 to 10 minutes. Teacher, you can replay the video whenever, or youth worker, you can replay the video whenever your participants or students are ready. But I'll give you about 10 minutes to do this activity. And all I want you to do is list 5 good things about plastic and 5 bad things about plastic. So whenever you're ready, you can pause the video now. Okay, I'm going to assume that it was easier for people to think of 5 bad things about plastic than it was to think of the good things. We can get into the bad things about plastic a little bit later, so feel free to keep whatever lists that you've made in front of you. But with the 5 good things about plastic, let's have a look at some. So, the biggest things that we need plastic for, and that have revolutionized us as a society, are medical plastics. So to be able to have your bloods taken with a plastic syringe that can just be easily thrown out. It doesn't cost much, we don't really have to pay for it. And then to also be able to have tubes that are easily disinfected, or that can be, I suppose, single use. So, and then also just the actual parts of medical machinery that need to be lightweight and durable, that have to involve plastic instead of heavy metals. Then we also have food storage. So to be able to actually preserve the freshness of food, to be able to transport that food all around the world, or to even store it in our own homes, has been completely revolutionary. We wouldn't have half of the foods that we have now if we didn't have plastic to help transport them. Then also for protection. So bulletproof vests, helmets, all of those are used and made from plastic. And also, this is a weird one, plastic was actually invented to help save animals. Now, I'm sure that many of you in your list reasons why plastic is bad section wrote down that plastic harms animals in some way, shape, or form. But it was actually invented with the purpose of saving animals. And that's because back before we had plastic widely usable, the main things that were used because it was light and durable were elephant tusks and tortoise shells. So elephants are, as we know, not doing great in terms of their populations, neither are tortoises. And this is because they were hunted in their droves to try and get their tusks and the tortoise shell. So plastic was invented to try to alleviate that population stress. It's interesting how the tables turn, but we'd still have to hunt for ivory and tortoiseshell if we didn't have plastic. And then, of course, technology and transport. So a lot of the things that you use in your daily life, from watches to phones, you wouldn't be watching me right now, or I wouldn't be able to record this for you right now if it wasn't for plastic components and plastic machinery. And then transport, you wouldn't be able to see the world without airplanes, trains, boats that all use plastic. So plastic is good, and we need plastic, but we don't need as much single-use plastic. What does that mean? Can you name some single-use plastics? Take about 1 minute in your group and feedback as well with other classmates. So maybe I'll give you about 2 minutes. And just list as many single-use plastics as you can think of. Teacher, you can pause the video now. Okay, welcome back. I'm sure that you've got a lot of single-use plastics such as containers like plastic water bottles or food containers. Some of you may have got things like the pens that you might be holding in your hand. Some of you may have got packaging and wrappers, you know, all of these sorts of things. But did you know that fashion can actually be a single-use plastic? So there is actually a thing called plastic clothes. And 80% of our clothes are plastic, which might be surprising to you. So if you're wearing a school uniform right now, or if you're talking to a youth group and you're just in your normal clothes, I want you to take maybe 2 minutes. You can get a friend to help you if you need to check the back, but I want you to check the labels on your clothes, and I want you to find what your clothes are made of. Typically in clothes, the labels are either at the back or on the left-hand side, so you can have a check for those. And just find out some of the materials your clothes are made of. 2 minutes. Teacher, you can pause the video here. Okay, welcome back. So, with clothes, if your clothes had cotton, wool, or linen, or silk for some reason, they are natural materials. So they're not too bad for the environment. Cotton can be a little bit because it uses a lot of pesticides to grow, but they are natural materials. But if you had polyester, nylon, acrylic, elasticine, any of those kinds of fabrics, they are made out of plastic. They're actually made from the exact same oil that we looked at earlier. They go through the exact same process of determining what kind of plastics they are. And if they're weak and stretchy and can be shredded and then woven into clothes, it's just plastic clothes. Bear that in mind when you are buying clothes. The biggest issue with plastic clothes is that when you wash them in the washing machine, those tiny microscopic fibers can actually come out with the huge spinning of your washing machine drum and are essentially washed down the drain and out into the ocean because they're so small that they pass through the sieves and are just flushed out to sea. And that's one of the reasons why we have so many fish now ingesting plastic, is actually because of what's called plastic microfibers that come out of our clothes. So always try and pick clothes that have those natural materials in them instead of the synthetic plastic materials. Then we also have, of course, packaging. So this was a tweet that was sent to ASOS that said, "Hey ASOS, you may use electric vans now, but why was all this plastic packaging needed for one ring?" So a lot of companies have just gone a little bit insane with the whole plastic wrapping idea, so bear that in mind when you're buying something too. And just so you're aware that this pile that you can see here, this was a demonstration that was done a few years back to show just how much textile waste and clothes waste, particularly plastic clothes, are thrown out in Ireland and the UK every 10 minutes. So it would not take long to fill the room that you're in. I'd say you've already been listening to me now for well over a half an hour. So imagine this times 3, you start to feel a little bit cramped already. So just do bear that in mind, especially when I say clothes can be single-use plastics, especially if it's coming up to Halloween or something and you want to make a costume and you might go into Pennies and you might buy something really cheap and kind of flimsy and you'll cover it in blood or something and you'll wear it once and then it goes in the bin. Clothes can be single-use plastics, and the majority of clothes sold in Pennies are synthetic materials because they're cheaper. Can you list some ways that single-use plastics can harm humans, animals, or the environment? I already kind of gave you some throughout the workshop, so just have a little bit more of a deeper think. I'm going to give you between 5 and 10 minutes to do this activity. So teacher, whenever you're ready, you can pause the video here. Okay, I hope you came up with some really interesting ideas. I'm going to show you mine now, and feel free to see if you've thought of any more or ones that I've missed, or feel free to see if what you've come up with aligns with what I have. So the first one I have is waste. This is obviously a massive issue globally. We don't typically have this amount of waste in Ireland, and that's because, luckily for us, we're not beside what's called a gyre. So in the ocean, there are several of these gyres, which are basically massive, really slow moving currents that kind of form like a whirlpool. And essentially, a ton of plastic gets trapped in these slow moving gyres underneath the water. But then, when a storm rolls around and passes through these gyres, it kicks up and drags with it a ton of plastic to nearby islands and nearby coastlines and cities, and you end up with a horrible scene like this. It has happened to Ireland in the past, but we tend to not get too many storms. However, if climate change keeps going the way that it's going, more extreme weather events will occur, and Ireland will probably see coastlines like this more and more frequently. Then we also have the issue of this waste when it comes to soil and water pollution. So I think that's something that a lot of people don't think of, is that most plastic floats. So it sits at the top of the water and it's pelted all of the time by UV radiation from the sun. And we know for a fact that that UV radiation from the sun damages the plastic and splits it and starts to leach plastic chemicals back into the soil and the water around it. So any fish living in this soil, any insects living around here, any animals that want to drink out of this river or lake are potentially completely affected by the plastic chemicals that seep in. This can also be said for plants and crops that we want to grow to eat as humans. And it actually has been found now that plastic particles are actually showing up in fruit and veg. So it's not just our meats anymore, it's actually our fruit and vegetables too. The next one, which I just mentioned, is we're eating it. And there was a study done by the World Wildlife Federation that found that approximately humans consume 1 credit card worth of plastic per week. And the number one cause of this was by drinking from soft plastic water bottles. So soft plastic is any plastic that you can crunch, and harder plastics are ones that you can't. They're kind of tough and rigid. So just bear that in mind when you're making choices about what you buy to consume. The next one then, of course, is that plastic can be a huge danger to wildlife. So we're seeing more and more wildlife now that are dying from strangulation or from accidental ingestion. And I didn't put up a photo of accidental ingestion because it can be really nasty. But of course, we have animals that are getting caught in beer can rings, in plastic bags that are flying through the air, and the milk carton rings that are around the milk cartons and drink cartons. And we also have an issue of it damaging animals through oil spills. So because there is such a demand for plastic, more and more oil has to be found, and unfortunately when it gets to the point that we're starting to run out of oil spots on land that we can find, we then turn to finding oil spots at sea. And that's when we end up getting oil spills that affect tons of marine life, marine mammals and birds. And then of course the humans who live on those coastlines have to come and do their job to clean it up. And even more unfortunately, so many times the company that actually spills the oil either gets away scot-free or just has to pay a fine. And sure, the fine could be millions, but they're billion-dollar industries for oil because plastic is such a huge demand. So it's not really denting them in any way. Then, of course, we have climate change. So climate change is, of course, a huge issue that is affecting humans and animals. And one of the main ways that it's affecting it is obviously through glaciers melting because global temperatures are rising, and then also when the glaciers melt, the sea levels rise, and that creates huge issues for animals all across the globe and for humans who live on coastal areas or on islands. But another thing that's happening with climate change that we weren't really anticipating was very, very unusual migrations. So this was a photo that was taken in Siberia in Russia. This is a bit south of Siberia, so it's in a more habitable area. But this polar bear essentially lived in northern Siberia. And then because the actual temperature of the ocean started to heat up, all of the fish who were used to colder waters started to migrate further north to try and find that cold spot again. And then all of the seals that used to eat those fish realized they had no food anymore. So the seals also started to move north to try and follow the migrations of the fish. But the polar bears cannot swim the same distances that seals and fish can swim. So the polar bears who used to eat the seals now had no food and were just stuck on the continent or the northern part of Siberia. So instead of moving northward into the ocean, they had to move southward into the cities. And more instances are now happening where these wild polar bears are roving through cities and going through bins and trash cans, just trying to find food to survive. So climate change is affecting us in that way too. That all sounds very doom and gloom, but there is actually a lot of things that we can do to help. Can you think of anything? I'm going to give you another 10 minutes to try and work together in your teams and come up with different things that you could do after we talked about the whole course of this workshop. What are things that you could do to help? So 10 minutes, teacher, you can pause the video here. Okay, welcome back. So once again, feel free to link some of these up with ones that you have, and if you have additional ones on top of mine, even better. First one, and to be honest, I think probably the most important one is stop buying things that you don't really need. We've gotten into this huge issue now where every single person in the world believes that they deserve to treat themselves all the time and deserve to have all of the things, when this whole idea of consumerism really only came up in the last maybe 2 to 3 generations. When your grandparents were growing up, there is no way that they had the same amount of material things in your house that you do. So if you don't need it, don't buy it. And that doesn't just go for plastic items, that goes for all items. Start trying to be happy with the things that you have and stop trying to covet all of these other things that you want, because you don't really need them. And you buying them is hugely damaging to the planet. So this is a quote from a fashion designer called Dame Vivienne Westwood, and she says, "Buy less, choose well, and make it last. Quality rather than quantity. That is true sustainability. If people only bought beautiful things rather than rubbish, then we wouldn't have climate change." And that is so true. So it is actually our desire to keep buying things that is creating climate change, because climate change is caused by fossil fuels and us burning fossil fuels. And the only reason why we're burning fossil fuels, apart from maybe heating our houses, is to make things that we can buy. So if we all just stop buying things and start appreciating what we already have, we wouldn't have this issue of climate change. The next thing when it comes to clothes is to look at the label. So make sure that you're buying these natural materials. You'll notice that I did not put cotton in the natural materials. Cotton is actually not particularly environmentally friendly. It uses more water than any other material or like plant material on Earth. And it uses a lot of pesticides as well, which can also affect soil and water and species and animals that live around it. But try to buy natural materials instead of the plastic ones. Go reusable. So try to actually buy reusable items. If you don't already, buy reusable coffee cups or buy reusable water bottles. Stainless steel is great, or that tougher plastic is great too, but at least it means that you're only buying one bottle and not having to buy 7 or 8 in a week. You can also get face cloths that are made out of bamboo or other materials like linen, and these are face cloths that you use to either wash your face or to take off makeup. And essentially you just use them and then pop them in the washing machine, wash them. There's no plastic fibers in there, so it's not harming the environment, and then they're ready to go again. So instead of using cotton face pads, or instead of using baby wipes, which are made out of plastic, by the way, and please do not flush them because they are made out of plastic. They're just going to go down the drain and go out into the ocean. You can buy these that you can use forever. You also have travel kits for forks, knives, cutlery, things like that, and straws, so that you don't need to use the plastic cutlery that are served in most restaurants and cafes. We have bamboo toothbrushes instead of plastic toothbrushes. These are those silicone covers that I mentioned earlier instead of using cling film, and I have a set of them and they're honestly amazing. They are microwave safe, dishwasher safe, and all you have to do is throw them into the dishwasher and wash them whenever you need to. And they are airtight as well, so nothing spills if you tip over a glass or if you tip over a bowl that has liquid in it or a sauce in it. It keeps everything in the bowl, which is just incredible, so I recommend those. And then, of course, not using plastic bags. If you have cotton or hemp tote bags, use them. Don't go out and buy them specifically for that purpose if you can, because as I said, cotton is really energy intensive. But if you already have them, use them and carry them with you instead of the plastic ones. So here are some Irish websites and stores where you can buy all of those things that I just showed you. The first one that I wanted to talk about is Minimal Waste Grocery, and this is incredible because if you have a lot of cereals or pastas in your house, or rice or things like that, what they do is they deliver those to your door with no plastic packaging, and you can actually give them your own jars. They'll take your jars, fill them up with whatever you want, and then deliver them back to you, which is great. So no plastic for all of those. They also do it for shampoo, conditioner, body wash, like floor cleaners for that your mom or dad might use, or like cleaners for wiping down surfaces. They're really fantastic, so definitely check them out. Then we have shops that are like Green Outlook Ireland, the Little Green Shop, Quick Crop, Eco Store, Reusey. These are all websites that are Irish and that do have all eco-friendly and these kind of reusable items for you to buy. And then the last piece of advice that I have for you all after you've decided to kind of go more sustainable in your life is to really, really go proactive in your life. Be loud. So we've had an amazing uptake of young people now going through this climate revolution, and we really have to keep that momentum going. So work together and demand change. And one way that you can do that and that you can work together for this change is by doing an environmental action project. And ECO-UNESCO can help with that by actually rewarding your environmental action project and lifting that up even to higher platforms through the YEA. So if you are interested in entering the Young Environmentalist Awards, please do reach out to us. So also, don't be afraid to lobby your local TDs and politicians. If you don't know who your local TDs and politicians are, a quick Google search will bring them up. So make sure that you do that. Their job is to be put under pressure to know what their citizens want. That's what they're paid to do. So make sure that you get your voice out there and tell them what you want. So if you don't want as much plastic in your local supermarket, make sure they know that so that they can actually help. And I'm going to end this workshop with what I think is a really powerful quote from the previous Secretary General of the United Nations, who has the wonderful name of Ban Ki-moon. But he said, "You are the first generation that can put an end to poverty, and the last generation that can put an end to climate change." And that's a really scary prospect. But all of us at ECO-UNESCO do believe that young people have the power to do that. And you also have the energy and the passion to do it. A lot of the times when you get to adulthood, you get so set in your ways of doing a certain thing that you don't want to rock the boat. But young people want to rock the boat, and we want to be there with you. So if any of you do want to follow up with any of the ECO-UNESCO staff on action projects or even just things that you can do, feel free to reach out to us. Your teacher should have my or somebody else's email from ECO-UNESCO. And you can also reach out to us on social media. So we are on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and YouTube, I think, as well. And we post about projects that we're doing, future workshops, youth courses, climate action events, and we post help about the YEA if you're looking to do an action project. So thank you so much for listening. I hope that you've enjoyed today's workshop and that you've gotten something out of it. And hopefully I will see you at the Young Environmentalist Awards sometime in the future. But for now, have a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye!